Hey guys, we're here for our next session. It's going to be a governance panel with MolachDao, Compound, and MakerDao. And I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thanks. I don't see a countdown. Are we live?
I think we're live.
We're live. Bottom left.
Bottom left. Oh yeah, nice. All right, cool. Okay, great. Sounds like people can hear us. Hi everyone. My name is Amin Soleimani. I'm going to be moderating today's governance panel. Here with me I have Robert Leshner from Compound and Charlie St. Louis from MakerDao. So I am the CEO of SpankChain. I've helped build MolachDao and a couple other DAOs, VentureDao, the Lao. Have a couple other things we're working on. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your role and how you came into it, and just brief background?
Yeah, so I'm Robert. I'm the founder of Compound. We started Compound about 3 years ago to create interest rate markets for Ethereum assets. For the last 3 years, Compound started off as a system controlled by one centralized entity, but we're now very rapidly approaching this transition to community governance, which we're somewhere between halfway and 3/4 of the way through. And so we're actively experimenting with governance in a very transparent and open fashion. And the community can right now really watch Compound undergo this transformation from a product with an admin to a product with an entire community responsible for its governance.
Yeah, so I'm Charles St. Louis. I've been working at the Maker Foundation for around 1.5 years now. My role has been to lead the charge on Maker's decentralization efforts with a focus on the self-sustainability of the DAO and protocol. In terms of coming into this role, when I first joined, the focus was on launch of multi-collateral DAI. But around 1 year ago, we did start the research and development of Maker improvement proposals with a focus on engineering. But as we progressed over the year, it became apparent that we would need to incorporate this governance structure in it as well. So yeah, that's how I got into the role.
Great. Thanks for joining us, both of you. And for today's conversation, I want to focus on it's about governance. So I'm going to ask both of you to introduce your projects again, but really with a focus on the governance. So talk about the past governance structure, the present governance structure, and the future governance structure plans that you guys have, and sort of the motivation behind the evolution.
Yeah, I'll start. And I'll talk about the present, which is also the future. And the only thing that's going to change is the number of participants in the system. So the way that Compound governance works is the governance system can control every single aspect of the protocol. It can change pretty much most variables and parameters in the system. It can replace contracts with other contracts. And it basically has full control of what used to be controlled by our core team. So the governance contracts, the way it works is there's a governance token called comp. And comp token holders can vote themselves, or they can assign their votes to any other address. And that any other address can be their own wallet, maybe a hot wallet. That other address can be a DAO. It can be somebody they trust. It could be a professional. It can really be anyone. And that creates this fluid voting dynamic. From there, anybody who has been assigned 100,000 comp votes can propose a change to the protocol, whether it's a parameter or whether it's an entirely new contract. So the scope of the proposal can be very tiny or very large. And this requires 100,000 comp out of 10 million. So it requires 1% of all the comp in existence to support you before you're able to propose changes, mostly to prevent, griefing. From there, the community can vote over 3 days in a very simple majority for or against a proposal. And any proposal that has a majority of votes cast in its favor and it's had a minimum of 400,000 yes votes goes into effect after 2 days. These proposals are code; they're not suggestions for a foundation. If someone made a proposal that said change the logo on Compound's website, you can't do that. The only thing that's being proposed are modifications to the protocol. And that's it. Right now, there's a limited number of comp that's been allocated to a smaller group of stakeholders while we test the system, while we delegate to the community, while we experiment with the mechanics of it. And in a couple months, the entire community and the entire user base of Compound is going to wind up with comp tokens and be able to participate in this governance system. So it's a really exciting and open system. Everything is transparent, so you can see the entire history of all proposals, all voters, all actions. We built something that seems like Etherscan, but for compound governance. And the idea is it's at a very early state with a small number of actors, and over time it's going to become a very big state.
Cool. Charles, do you want to take the same question?
Yeah. Are we allowed to ask questions throughout? Like if anyone has questions, are we going to just do it throughout or after, or how do we want to do that?
Yeah, I guess if you have questions, we can throw them in the ask a question thing. Do I have to open this, or I don't see it if it's something I'm supposed to be able to see. So I guess put them in the chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, some of you may be aware of what MakerDao is, but it's a decentralized organization that's focused on bringing stability to the world, and it uses a two-token model. So the first being DAI, which is this collateral-backed stablecoin, soft pegged to the USD, and then there's the second token, which is MKR, and it's our governance token. In terms of the past of Maker governance, it's one of the oldest on-chain voting systems. And for every token locked in, that represents one vote in the on-chain pool or executive vote. And the expectation is that MPR holders will be able to decide how the system evolves over time. And with our current plan for the self-sustainability initiative, we get further into how this is possible with three main pillars, which we'll get into later. But in terms of the current system, we use a variety of different signaling methods and discussion channels, such as like weekly community calls and governance and risk calls, the forums, forum polls, and then the on-chain polling system, which is separated into two different types. But typically, MPR governance is used for onboarding new collaterals, selecting new oracles and price feeds, stabilizing the peg of DAI, so by modifying the stability fee, the debt ceilings, and the DSR as well. In terms of the future of Maker governance, which is something that I'm really excited about, there's the few key pillars that Amin will ask about later, hopefully. But it's Maker improvement proposals, elected paid contributors, and then vote delegates, or protocol politicians, if you will. So as of today, we've proposed 13 Maker improvement proposals covering a core governance framework, a collateral onboarding process, and then two other proposals for onboarding an official MIP editor, which was actually myself, and a smart contracts domain team who will work with the collateral onboarding process to build adapters and implement the risk parameters for those collateral types. So these proposals were actually ratified yesterday in the executive vote, and they're effectively now law. So I can talk about it further later, but this is what's going on in Maker right now.
Cool. So let's talk about some of the differences between the various governance structures at a sort of high level. So one of the things that's different is that the comp token, right, is a sort of like pure play governance token, right? The only point of the only thing you can do with it right now is to vote and propose updates to Compound. The Maker token also has some other functionality where it is system surplus. The fees that are generated from the system is used to put buying pressure and buy back the MKR and burn it. But on the other hand, it also serves as insurance, where it's minted and it dilutes the holders if the system falls under, becomes under collateralized. So one question I have is, like, for Robert first is, why did you decide against a buyback and burn model for comp? And are there any plans to include the token in the fee earnings?
So one of the most important guiding principles as we've designed governance is simplicity. I think simplicity is the root of security. It's the root of having a system that's easy to participate in. Everything we're doing is designed to make it as simple as possible, period. And we've actually looked to shave off every possible piece of complexity as we've been rolling out the system. Decentralizing is extremely hard. And so the simpler you can make it, the better in our mind. So at launch, we wanted there to be as few bells and whistles and mechanics and levers for the comp token as possible. That being said, the comp token can upgrade or change anything in the proposal. So over time, you could upgrade the governance system. You could upgrade how comp token plays with the system. You could add economics. You could add other models. You could add an interaction with the reserves or as like a token of last resort. You can add all of these things over time. We didn't want any of that as we rolled it out. We wanted it to be as like narrow as possible. So when we get to the point of complete decentralization, there won't be any of those features. But if the token holders in the community think that they're appropriate, they can debate them, suggest them, create proposals for them, and implement them as time goes on.
Cool, interesting. So the comp holders could decide to pay themselves at some future point if they felt strongly about it.
They could. And at launch, there's no mechanism like that at all. In a lot of ways, we believe that if the governance system works as it's supposed to work, then you can add anything that you can imagine.
Cool. So a question for Charles is, what do you consider the advantages of having the buyback and burn over a pure governance token for now, as Compound has?
Yeah, so there's a few main things, but in general, MKR is a governance token, but it uses this mint and sell model depending on the state of the system. So the three advantages that come to mind now are that MKR holders have more skin in the game, which incentivizes better decisions ultimately. And having this skin in the game token drives a higher valuation for itself and decreases the potential of governance attack. And lastly, like I mentioned, depending on the state of the system, the Maker protocol has a 3 auction system. So there's a collateral auction system, which is when vaults are liquidated and the collateral in those vaults gets up for auction. There's a surplus auction, which is when a certain limit of the system reaches this level and then the surplus gets sold off. And then there's a debt auction where you have to cover this debt. So MKR is critical in this perspective. And without MKR, there's no backstop for DAI when in becoming under collateralized. And this ultimately makes the system that much stronger. So those are the main things I think are advantages for MKR.
Cool. So you talked a bit about the transition to MakerDAO's decentralized governance, Charles. And to reiterate, the plan is to dissolve the Maker Foundation, get elected paid contributors, have Maker improvement proposals, and vote delegates. And so I guess my first question on that is, why is it so important to dissolve the Maker Foundation?
Yeah, so gradual decentralization has been a Maker Foundation's core principle since it was published back in 2018. And now that MCD has been delivered, we're trying to accelerate this decentralization push. And in order to achieve self-sustainability, Maker needs this new generation of core governance and independent contributors, or a decentralized workforce, if you will. And lastly, the foundation has a finite runway and will inevitably run out of capital. So being proactive and preparing for that is really important as well.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that sort of each of the 3 pillars of the governance are so important? What is the motivation behind their design?
The motivation behind them?
Mm-hmm.
So before I kind of go into the details of each of those 3 things, so now that the Maker improvement proposals and the frameworks for core governance and collateral onboarding are now published, there's a specific proposal in there called, it's MIP1, and it's this governance paradigms. And it talks about all the problem spaces that we'll need to solve on our way to self-sustainability as a DAO and as a protocol. And these 3 core pillars are the keys in transitioning there. But there's a lot of other things, like creating a voting incentive mechanism, or how the community will use the foundation's assets in the future and kind of coordinate these like websites that are kind of controlled by the foundation right now. Maybe looking at new designs for auctions. So it's this like massive problem space list that it's a best guess as of today, and it will evolve over time based on the needs and kind of risks and opportunities that the community will face. But the main three are important because it sets precedent for the future. So the Mips framework and Mips in general are very similar to other improvement proposal frameworks. However, we've added a lot of features and processes that are specific to Maker governance. So in general, Mips allow the community to agree and process kind of the needs in the short term in order to ensure the safety of the system after the foundation does dissolve. And the beauty of Mips is that it allows any community member to propose a change that they find important and that the rest of the community can either help them work with or fix it or edit it and ultimately vote it in. So it helps the community kind of spot these opportunities and propose them as opposed to just leaving up to like one kind of centralized entity.
Right. So these are all sort of responsibilities that the foundation had been, taking on, and in order to actually effectively have this decentralized governance system, like you need the ability for the decentralized governance to like work on stuff through the improvement proposals.
It's like this formalized standard process that they can use in the future. And
it's not just like, hey, Maker Foundation, why didn't you build X? It's like, hey, can we all do X, right?
Yeah, if you have an idea, go ahead and propose it. And if everyone agrees, then it will be implemented, much like Robert said in his answer.
Right. Rob, what do you think about their new governance structure?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference is, saying, if we all agree, on something, we'll go and do it. The biggest difference is with Compound, we don't have that intermediary step. We believe in this very primitive code is law type structure in which a proposal is the end result. It's the work that's been done. It's saying this is exactly how we're going to change the protocol. Mm-hmm. And there's no intermediary steps. It's no like, hey, we've all agreed on something, let's go build it. It's at the very tail end, once it's been built, you can evaluate the code itself and how it changes the protocol, and that's it. So I like and I love the ability to gather the community around upgrades. I think that's phenomenal. I think it does allow more creativity in what can be accomplished. Let's, as you said, let's build a new website. Whereas on Compound, everything's on chain and nothing can reach outside of the blockchain to do anything.
It's interesting, the difference between those, because let's say there's someone who wants to add a collateral type to Maker or build some smart contract functionality. And it's not always the case that they're going to go ahead and build something and then propose it, because that means there's a lot of potentially wasted work that could go on. So getting this kind of, by creating an initial proposal, allowing the community to vote on it, and then kind of giving that the green light to go, then they can begin the work and then ultimately get it voted in or ratified after. So I find there's like certain aspects and benefits to both, and it seems like there's a separation between these two, because the current and future versions of Maker governance like involve a lot of economic and social proposals as well, and just processes in general. Whereas correct me if I'm wrong, is more just based on technical changes and technical upgrades.
Yeah, it's just technical changes. And those technical changes can be economic or social in some capacity, but only things that actually touch the smart contract layer.
Okay. So one follow-up to that is, Robert, does Compound have any similar plans to dissolve the company, or why not?
Yeah, so, our plan is for the company not to be involved in the protocol, that the community can upgrade the protocol and run with it, and it doesn't need us in any way. We'll be left to go devise new business models and, to make the most of a company that's already been created. But the goal is that, the Compound protocol is able to be upgraded and maintained by people that aren't us. We're already starting to see signs of that. Like, we've already had 2 test proposals, one, proposed by the Compound team, one proposed by an outside team, both of which passed, both of which were executed, both of which upgraded the protocol. And it's proven that you don't actually need us. We didn't write the code. We didn't build out the proposal that upgraded the protocol. There was actually a proposal from one of the applications built on top of Compound, Dharma, to change an interest rate model. We didn't write the code, you know. We weren't there for it, you know. And I think that's the future, is that like we can go away. You know, my dream is to retire to a desert island, and the community can continue to upgrade Compound as like they see opportunities to. And so, you know, our vision is that over time, you know, we're not involved in the underlying protocol. We might build businesses on top, or we might, you know, come up with our own revenue streams, but not through the protocol itself.
Go ahead.
Okay. I find incentivizing these community members is a really key pillar to that, right? In the long-term sustainability of both of our protocols. So, I mean, that's one of the solutions with elected pay contributors, is that the protocol needs this decentralized workforce in order to maintain and keep it secure and also build future functionality. So by allowing the protocol to elect and pay contributors, it seems like it's a really important part and a huge step forward. So do you see that Compound could eventually be hiring or paying these contributors to continue to maintain Compound, or do you not?
So my personal vision, and there's probably going to be 10 opinions that are not this, but my personal vision is that we actually don't need that, because there's a lot of applications that are building on top of Compound that do care. You don't have to pay the applications built on Compound to want to see it succeed, because they already want to see it succeed. I think over time, the more wallets, applications, and things that are like built on top of Compound, the more, you know, vested interest there is. And I think, you know, they already have an incentive. They don't have to be compensated to ensure that, you know, they vote correctly. So and maybe this goes back to like, you know, simpler is better in my mind, you know, and that only works if there's a large ecosystem that's built on top of Compound. But I think the more applications there are, the more, you know, nodes and keeping this thing alive there's going to be.
I think it's wonderful that both of you guys sort of aspire to build systems that are so valuable to the communities that they sort of demand ownership and participation, and then you know, grant it, and that's how like the endgame is. It's also cool to see you guys running, you know, 2 governance experiments in parallel in the open. So that we can all sort of learn from each other. You know, maybe Robert comes on here a year later and is like, you know, we started needing to pay people.
Right.
Yeah,
the comp holders voted to pay themselves to elect.
Right.
Who knows how it evolves?
Yeah, exactly. It's cool.
Yeah.
So switching gears a bit, what do you guys consider the most serious threats to your governance? What are the sort of attack, you know, vectors that you guys are thinking of when you're designing it?
I'll go first. I honestly, I think it's accidental security stupidity. I think, you know, the biggest risk is that an appropriate amount of time doesn't go into creating a proposal that's safe, or that people get overly confident. And I think that is balanced by the stakeholders over time getting very cautious and defensive about modifications to the protocol. Say, you know, demanding audits, demanding proof that things are going to operate safely and securely and effectively. And I think that, you know, for us, governance, you know, I don't think there's a huge surface area for economic attacks. We've made a lot of design decisions very early on to build safety mechanisms in around how much, you know, influence you need, and making sure that like really the larger stakeholders are always aligned with seeing it succeed. Is that, you know, the biggest risk is going to come from, you know, getting cocky. And I think the comp token holders are, you know, in a great position to demand, you know, security and safety from everything that gets thrown at us. But I think that's going to be the Achilles heel.
Yeah, I guess to further that point, well, first, I think that the governance threats are widely kind of known throughout Ethereum and DeFi. The main ones that I kind of worry about are voter fatigue and voter apathy. So if you're constantly running through this process of having frequent votes all the time, and people kind of get tired of tired with it, they just stop voting. And that also leads to voter apathy, in which that people don't really care what goes through, or they miss the opportunity to vote, and that allows malicious proposals to sneak through. I think this is widely across all on-chain voting systems, or any governance system in general, is that there's generally low participation amount, and low participation can also lead to what Robert said in a poorly thought out or malicious proposal to slip through the cracks. So this is why I think it's really important to experiment with voting incentive mechanisms. I think the last one, well, I mean, in general, there's also the potential risks out there that are outside of our control. So like governance and regulations, and determining what tokens are and how they're categorized and those kind of things. But lastly, in general, I think it's the pace of governance. So governance in general is a slow process. I mean, as Robert said, his votes happen over 3 days. Makers can range from 4 days, or for executive votes, whenever the certain amount of MKR reaches this limit. So the pace of governance can be an issue, and if it doesn't react in critical situations fast enough, it can be a big problem. So those are the ones that come to mind.
Mm-hmm. I guess for me, it's sort of interesting that both of you guys consider accidental, like, oh, there was a bug in a proposal and we missed it, sort of something obscure that just like crept up on you, not like, some whale gone rogue, for example.
That was the last one I forgot to mention, is that governance can be captured by one large entity and use the protocol primarily for their own benefit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in general, I mean, when you're one of the main focuses of the Maker Improvement Proposal Framework is that it has a certain amount of core principles. And the main one I want to get at is specificity. So a proposal needs to be as specific as possible and address one sort of behavior. Because if it allows for more, people can create these massive proposals and allow this certain behavior to sneak in like this fine print. And without that, I mean, it's not a good mix for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I like about both your protocols now is that there is a governance delay in the execution of upgrades. That was something as a user I appreciate, because I'm always sort of wary. There's this common thing where like you guys know all the people and trust all the people, but it's hard for me to trust that you guys know people as an outsider, right? I'm sort of taking your word for it. And so it's good to know that like there's at least some time. I think Compound was 3 days. Maker was 12 hours, 6 hours. Sort of jumps back and forth. They extend it. I think.
So Compound is actually 5 days. So proposals are voted on over 3 days, and then any proposal that wins, there's a 2-day delay before it goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So
like that.
Even
Great.
if we go completely evil, or every comp token holder gets kidnapped all at the same time, right? You still have basically a 5-day window to observe something that you think you disagree with and exit. There's nothing that can ever stop any user from exiting Compound. It's kind of like the MolachDao rage quit in a lot of ways. I mean, actually, we're really inspired by the rage quit ability. So if you ever see something you don't like, you always have time to rage quit, to leave and to say like, the governance system went haywire, I'm out.
Yeah, I'm really waiting for the service that just like texts me and they're like, hey, Compound's about to blow up. Like, get out, dude. Right?
Yeah. To everyone listening at home, like you should build systems to like enable to rage quit protocols. Like make it like the rage quit text alert service,
Mm-hmm. Somebody made something like that. I think I saw it. Spells.fyi, I think.
Spells.fyi is a great new website that shows all the pending governance actions of different protocols. That's a good step along the way. Cool.
I think we're running up on time. I think we started early, so maybe we'll get a couple of freebie minutes. I have one last question that's you may or may not like. Is there ever a chance that we'll see you taking a path, or like the governance taking a path towards obviating itself? And so like personally, I tend to prefer governance minimized platforms, right? Like there's a lot of human stuff that can go wrong in between me and the protocol, right? So I guess I don't expect, like, you hear the joke of like the bureaucracy is expanding to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy, right? And a part of me feels like the governance is sort of similar, where like governance might have a really hard time taking out governance, for example. How do you guys think about that question?
As an individual, and I can't speak for anyone else, but as an individual, I actually want compound governance to over time obviate itself. I actually think the best crypto governance in a lot of ways is Bitcoin, because it moves extremely slow. Changes to that protocol are very long in the making. They're very contentious for a reason. You don't see many changes, and that's in a lot of ways its deepest strength. And so I think that a lot of compound governance has been designed so that over time it can slow down. It gets easier to say no to things than it does to say yes to things. Mm-hmm. And I actually want over time for it to harden. And people stop making proposals unless they're really important.
What about you?
I think that automating as much governance as possible is definitely something that's really good, and it's likely necessary in the long run. And like, you can think about the manual short-term processes now as necessary pieces in learning how to best automate future governance. But I do think that humans will always be needed to some extent when making fixes or changes and improvements to the system when the system is not performing. So I think there has to be some sort of level of like human interaction, but I do think that automating as much as possible is definitely something that's necessary for the long term.
It's cool. I'll throw out a completely shameless shill for Metacoin and Reflexer Lab. Going to work on trying to occupy the niche of governance minimized ETH only stablecoins. So we'll have more to report on that coming soon. But yeah,
it's exciting.
I think we have a lot to learn from Bitcoiners too. They come over and they're like, you guys don't know how to build anything. Like, what are all these humans talking about? Like, why are you making decisions? And like, what they've learned is, they just worship the algorithm, right? They're like 21 million difficulty adjustment, block every 10 minutes, 1 megabyte blocks, GG, right? That's it, game over, forever. And like, that'll work for as long as, it does until it doesn't. And like, part of the beauty of that is like, you can't out Bitcoin, right? You can't like take Bitcoin and add governance to it. That doesn't, solve like Bitcoin better, and I think that there is like, it's really hard to get something like that right, because the governance model isn't like get a bunch of people to steer the wheel together. It's like break the wheel and then let the car drive itself. So that obviously has disadvantages if there's another car in front of you, or you need to steer.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you guys so much. This is great. We're gonna switch to the next session now.
All right.
All right, take care.